Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Seas at Risk and Sciaena webinar on deep sea mining. I'm happy you could join us all this afternoon to listen about what's at stake in Europe in terms of deep sea mining. Before we start, I want to make very clear that the coming hour will be recorded and we'll share the recording afterwards. And as audience, you can all participate, but only through the Q&A bit below. There you can post comments and questions. And later in the Q&A session, we'll pick up on those. In the coming hour, we will first hear from Joám Evans, co-author of the Seas at Risk report at the Crossroads, Europe's role in deep sea mining. And that will then be followed by a panel facilitated by Matias from Sciaena. And on the panel, we are very lucky to have Marie-Luise Abshagen from Forum Umwelt Entwicklung, and Ingegjerd Meyer from Naturvernforbundet, and Gonçalo Carvalho from Sciaena, who will both elaborate a bit on their national realities in terms of deep sea mining. And then, as I said, there will be time for questions and answers before we wrap this whole thing up. And so I hope you're all ready for it. But before we start, I would like to, and give Joám the word, I would first like to already highlight our recommendations in our report, which are the 10 steps for Europe to champion deep sea protection. Because in order to achieve that, and Joám will explain all about it, but we will need to transition to a resource-efficient Green Deal and blue economy that focuses on well-being of planet and people. So growth without economic growth. We also need to set binding EU and national material footprint reduction targets for 2030, 2040, 2050, including for mining and metal supplies. We need to protect the deep sea in line with the nature recovery and protection commitments of the biodiversity strategy and the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. There needs to be a prohibition of deep sea mining in European waters or on continental shelves. And members of the International Seabed Authority have to, as members, we have to advocate for a conditional prohibition or a moratorium in international waters. We need to adopt specific trade and sectoral regulations banning import and use of raw materials that have been obtained or produced with deep sea minerals. Of course, we need to stop funding deep sea mining technology, but instead use that funding to support fundamental research into the role and the functioning of deep sea ecosystems, as well as into pathways to drastically reduce resource use. The ISA needs to get an institutional reform and become more transparent. And of course, we need an overarching ocean governance through the Global Ocean Treaty, the Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBNJ. And in all that, we need to involve environmental ministries, scientific bodies, and stakeholders in the adoption of all sorts of relevant decisions regarding deep sea mining in national and international waters. Now, this is a mouthful, but these are 10 very important steps that we would like to instill on policymakers. And fortunately, Joám is now going to explain how we got to these steps. Go ahead, Joám.
Joám, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Otherwise, I think I can do it.
I managed.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. Okay. So I was saying that just very briefly, I would like to introduce you to some of the highlights in the report, hopefully to encourage you to download it from our website and look at it with more time. First of all, I just want to very briefly show you through the sections of the report. The first couple of sections, we're not going to really talk about them today in the presentation, but they're kind of a general introduction to deep sea mining for all the readers that are not necessarily aware of the problems. So it presents what is deep sea mining, where could it happen both in European waters and international waters, what's at stake in terms of potential risks and environmental impacts, and we're showing the evidence for those potential impacts. And also the paper introduces deep sea mining governance, both in international waters and what's at stake at European waters, and of course what the role of European member states and other European countries has been in the structure of the International Seabed Authority. A second section analyzes the evolution of European policies regarding deep sea mining. So in a number of European institutions, we'll actually look a bit about the shift that has occurred over the past 10 years. And as Monica mentioned, we also analyze European policies that have to do with this growing demand of metals and how this, of course, relates to the surge of interest for deep sea minerals and potential deep sea mining. I won't mention the conclusions again, but the report also has two annexes which can be particularly useful, or that's how we thought of them. One is a set of country fact sheets which present kind of an intelligence, a very short 2-page intelligence report on what the status of deep sea mining is in each of these countries. It includes all European countries that have exploration contracts in the International Seabed Authority, but also a number of countries that have signaled interest in developing deep sea mining in the waters under national jurisdiction, or that have been involved with deep sea mining technologies or enterprises. And in the panel, we'll actually be hearing from 3 of these countries, from Norway, Portugal, and Germany. Last but not least, the report also has a database on EU-funded research that is related to deep sea mining. I'll just share some of the highlights of that a bit later, but the list actually shows in much more detail all that has been going on over the past decade. Now, very briefly, we don't have a lot of time. I just would like to point out the kind of shift in policies relating to deep sea mining that has taken place in Europe over the past 10 years or so. In 2012, you may recall the Blue Growth Strategy was approved, and that actually included for the first time deep sea mining as one of the 5 priority maritime sectors that was to be developed over the decade to come. And this, of course, led to a lot of interest, a lot of funding going into deep sea mining. But it's also interesting to look back and look at the narratives and the images of the future that this strategy had back in 2012, when it said that by 2020, 25% of the world minerals could come from the ocean floors. Fortunately, this has not been the case. And actually, in the next decade, there has been a slow shift. We can see this, and the report shows it, how this very kind of this initial position led to more nuanced stances. And for example, in 2016, the International Ocean Governance Communication already was not so sure about the framework of the International Seabed Authority for the sustainable management of the oceans. And in 2018, you're mostly all aware of the resolution by the European Parliament in international ocean governance. That was kind of a turning point where, for the first time, a call to support a moratorium was issued. And this language by the European Parliament kind of set the tone for some of the changes we've seen in recent years. Last year, the 2030 biodiversity strategy included similar language. It did not explicitly call for a moratorium, but the language was a bit similar to that European Parliament resolution. And over the last few months, there has been a lot of movement within this issue. In January, we had the proposal for a common EU position at the International Seabed Authority, again including this language from the biodiversity strategy. And just a few weeks ago, this same month, the Sustainable Blue Economy Strategy was published, which is called to replace that 2012 Blue Growth. And not only does not include deep sea mining as a strategic sector, as its predecessor did, but again, it also includes this more precautionary language in line with the biodiversity strategy. This same week, we're very much looking forward to the adoption by the European Parliament of its report on the 2030 biodiversity strategy. And of course, there will be other developments in the coming months. And the fact that this report appears at this point is also, and also has the idea of informing the debates that are actually taking place as we speak. However, not so fast. There's a lot of interest in deep sea mining, both in European waters and in international waters. The report presents some of the deposits within international water where commercial interest has been signaled. We'll be hearing a bit about Norway and Portugal later on today, but I invite you to check out some of the other areas where interest and research or initial exploration, scientific research has taken place, which also includes the area around the Canary Islands, the Madeira Island, and some other places in Europe, which again, the report also goes through. In international waters, this is a kind of a map of the areas in the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific, and you see the different exploration areas that are sponsored by European states. And these include, as you know, France and Germany, which are sponsoring public agencies for these exploration contracts. Also, the governor of Poland has its own area in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the Lost City. It includes Belgium and the UK, which are sponsoring private corporations. And then there's the Interocean Metal, which is an international consortium, which also includes Cuba and Russia, which is also there in the mix. So the paper, you will, both in the paper and then also in the country sheets, you'll see some of that. The paper also explores how different European countries have been involved in and continue to be involved in the structure of the International Seabed Authority. And we hope that can bring some clarity and to the different bodies and how different European countries are having different roles there. And as I mentioned earlier, as part of the report, we did a research on funding, EU funding going into deep sea mining related research. The report concludes that, of course, technology projects related to deep sea mining are having much more funding over the past decade than those based on fundamental research to understand the environment, the deep sea environment. And here you just see a few examples from the last decade of projects from different EU funding schemes that have been directly supporting deep sea mining research and technological research. Now, a good part of the report is focused also in trying to understand the underlying policies of the EU that is behind this growing demand for metals. It has to do with many of the emerging trends, renewable energies, electric vehicles, digitalization, space and defense technologies, how this has been kind of behind the surge of not only a growing demand for metals, but also a new narrative that emphasizes the issue of security of supply, access to resources, more of a geopolitical language that the report also questions and tries to actually frame within the need for broader systems change, and how that plays around some of the policies that had, like the Raw Materials Action Plan that was launched last September, European trade policies that also talk about unrestricted and sustainable access to raw materials and how this relates to deep sea mining, particularly in the Pacific, and how the circular economy strategy and some of its flaws need to be addressed, and also how flaws regarding circularity in a number of other EU policies also need to be considered. And let me say this in another way, I think the report also makes a critical point on how the failure of many circularity policies, the lack of binding targets, has to do with this need that is not being considered to actually keep minerals in the land, in the ground, and in the seabed. Fortunately, there's also a shift in this way of thinking, and the recent European Environmental Agency briefing that calls for growth without economic growth, which is something the paper also addresses, is maybe in that line. I won't go through the 10 steps again, and I'm already out of time. But again, I would encourage you to download the report, have a look, and in question and answers, we can maybe discuss some particular details, and also feel free to read it and get back to us with an email if you have any comments or criticism. So thank you so much, and we can maybe continue with the discussion.
Thank you, Joám. I think you can, yeah. Okay. So thank you for being only 1 minute, I think, after your time, but thank you for your quick overview on the report. I have just pasted the link for the report here on the chat, so that anyone can access it whenever they want. And as Monica said in the beginning, and first of all, let me just remember tell you something. You can drop your questions on the Q&A box at any time. We will be reading them afterwards. But now let's continue to what Monica said in the beginning. We hope to have like a scan of what's happening in Germany, Norway, and Portugal. And we would like to start with Germany with Marie-Luise. If you can unmute, Marie-Luise, maybe we could start with your points and your view of how this activity is going, is happening or is not happening in Germany, and what are your main concerns?
Yes, sure. Hello. I hope everybody can hear me. I'll give you a brief overview of the German deep sea mining politics and what we as civil society are doing on that matter. So in general, deep sea mining has been an on and off topic for the German government for decades. First interims regulation is from 1980 and the respective law is from 1995. Since 2006 and 2015 respectively, Germany has been holding 2 ISA exploration contracts. We saw that in the slide of Joám before, one for manganese nodules in the Claret-Clipperton zone and another one for sulfide deposits in the central Indian Ocean. Corresponding to the EU timeline, we saw things got a bit more active again in Germany too in the last couple of years, which unfortunately led to the fact that in 2018, deep sea mining was mentioned in the coalition government agreement for the first time, thus giving it sort of a further sense of validation for the administration for activities within the ISA. And the main argument here follows the logic that deep sea mining is needed to provide safe access to resources and security of supply for the German industry, especially its high-tech industry. It also says, though, that there is a need for environmentally sensitive deep sea mining based on international rules, and that Germany endorses a pilot mining test. All of this has been the guideline for the government in the ISA negotiations, where Germany has thus been very active from our perspective as civil society, both in a problematic as well as maybe slightly positive way, in light of the overall negotiation tendency in the ISA. Because while there is still the position by the government that the German industry needs deep sea mining in the future, as we are a high-level industrial country, and that the German industry should be part of the mining, most importantly ship manufacturers and suppliers of shipping equipment, which then led to Germany being quite active in bringing the negotiations forward. But on the other hand, there's a noticeable caution, I would say, in the position by now, which has grown in the last years, especially concerning the speed of the negotiations and the general style of the ISA secretariat in these negotiations. And you know what I mean by this, probably. And also the impact on the environment. This is also due to the fact that it is not only the Ministry of Economy, but also the Ministry of Environment at these negotiations. This is also something mentioned beforehand. As I said, deep sea mining activities got more active a while back. This is also the case for research. In 2011, a national master plan for maritime technologies was created to coordinate funding for maritime industries and technical research by different ministries. And thus funding for deep sea mining has been provided by, for instance, the Ministry of Economic Affairs to the Federal Institute of Geosciences and National Resources. This BGR, I'm saying this because the BGR is the German contractor at the ISA, a public agency. You might know, in a way, BGI also because it contributes to the EU GPIO Research Action Mining Impact and Mining Impact 2, which researches the environmental effects of potential deep sea mining. And as you probably know, the current research phase just took place these couple last weeks, where JPIO has been monitoring the activities of the Belgian contractor DEME in the ZZZ. Yeah, it took place, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. Now, as for civil society, some German organizations have been working on deep sea mining for decades as well. A couple of years ago, we then founded a working group on deep sea mining that includes environmental development organizations, as well as those organizations working on resource policies. And I think this is quite a unique combination, which has helped us to get to our strong position on deep sea mining, which is that we have been calling for a ban for many years. One of the main, though not the only reasons for this call for a ban is our link to our partners in the Pacific. And I think this is also quite unique for us as a German working group on deep sea mining. This is because we have been following the fights, especially in Papua New Guinea, very closely, and also had the privilege to have regularly have speakers from the Pacific in Germany, even those directly involved in coordinating civil society, churches, and community at the SOVA 1 site. So one, I think, unique aspect is this link to the Pacific, and the other one is that we have these members in the working group that work on resource policies. And this has led us from early on to not only link deep sea mining to harms of the environment, but also, for instance, to human rights abuses on land-based mining, or more generally on how to achieve a drastic reduction of the total raw material consumption in Germany and Europe, and how to sustainably shape the energy and mobility transition. And I think this is also quite a win for us that these narratives now all include an exclusion of deep sea mining in German civil society. As an outlook, we have elections coming up in September with a chance of a new government composition, and there have been lots of different talks with all democratic parties on oceans and resource policies, as well as human rights. And I think here an interesting angle, and that's my last point, is that climate change has become a major issue in the election campaigns for all parties. And so one of the things we have been doing as civil society is highlight the need to protect the oceans for climate reasons, but also to make visible that we cannot replace the climate crisis with a resource crisis. So I hope that we will not have deep sea mining in the next coalition agreement after all.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that we continue, and then all the questions can be addressed in the end with all of us and with the panelists. So I am moving on to Ingegjerd from Norway. I think you can unmute yourself, Ingegjerd. I can do it.
Yes, unmuting and also finding and sharing my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Just a second here. Yes, I think you now should be able to see my presentation.
Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. So, hello everybody. My name is Ingegjerd Meyer, and I am here to present the situation in Norway regarding deep seabed mining. I work as an advisor on biodiversity at the Norwegian Friends of the Earth. We are Norway's oldest environmental organization with over 35,000 members. And Norway is, after Fiji, the country with the second highest potential for deep seabed mining within its own economical zone. I have included the figure 4 from the report that we are here today to talk about to show you the areas that we are talking about. As you can see, Norway has a significant mineral deposits on its continental shelf, including ferromanganese crusts and sulfide deposits between the island of Joám Evans and Svalbard. Here is another figure showing the areas more in detail. This figure is from the new proposed plan for an impact assessment of the consequences of deep-seabed mining, which I will talk more about later. This plan has been developed by the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy here in Norway. The yellow areas outline the areas where the directorate estimate that there will be geological potential for economically interesting occurrences. And this yellow area covers an area of approximately 600,000 square kilometers. The prospect of deep seabed mining has been on the agenda for some time in Norway, and several studies of potential areas of interest have already been conducted. And these studies have both mapped the seafloor, and they'll have also taken samples. So here is a picture showing a robot taking a sample from a black smoker or a sulfuric vent. And the industry and politicians here in Norway are branding deep seabed mining as Norway's new oil adventure, and are incredibly enthusiastic because, of course, of the great overlap between Norway's oil and offshore industry and deep seabed mining. Attention from the media has been dominated by excited estimates of this new industry's prospective monetary value, but joint efforts from several environmental organizations has led to some critical attention as well. And I have shared one example with you in the webinar chat. The next Norwegian parliamentary election is happening in September this year, but so far deep seabed mining has not been subject to any political debate. The Norwegian government has initiated the opening process for exploration and exploitation of minerals on the Norwegian continental shelf. I have made a timeline here. And so you can see Norway got its law on deep sea minerals in 2019, and January this year, the proposed plan for how you should make an assessment of the potential impact of deep seabed mining was presented. Oh, I can see that I have perhaps shared. No, but I want to just see if I can fix that.
Everything seems okay, Inge.
Oh, it's okay. I thought you were seeing the presenter view and not the. Okay.
No.
Okay. I got a bit scared there. But yes, I was talking about the proposed plan for impact assessment that has now been presented to the public, and over 50 comments were collected. And now the plan will be put into action. And if everything goes according to the current plan, Norway could issue the first exploration license within 3 years, in 2023 or in 2024. And to finish off my presentation, I wanted to show you some footage from investigations done by the Center for Deep Sea Research from the University in Bergen in Norway. The debate around deep seabed mining in Norway fails to acknowledge that the same areas that are suitable for this kind of industry are the same areas that are teeming with a highly specialized form of life. Deep seabed mining has the potential to destroy or alter severely the habitats species depend on. And this is reflected by the fact that several species, newly discovered species of marine invertebrates, now have been proposed listed on the Norwegian Red List of threatened species. And this is a direct consequence of the proposed plans for deep seabed mining. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Ingegjerd, for your presentation, for your quick presentation, very effective, and a lot of interesting things for us to discuss right after Gonçalo can make his presentation about what's happening nowadays in Portugal regarding deep sea mining. Yeah, we can see your screen already. Yeah.
Let's see if I can mute myself. It seems I'm capable of doing that. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and co-host this event with CZ At Risk on a topic that is very, very dear to Sciaena. We've been engaged in it for a long time, and it's really something that concerns everyone. Well, yeah, most people who work on ocean conservation, specifically in Portugal. I'll try to save some time. I do recommend that you read the section on Portugal on the report, which I take the opportunity to congratulate. I think it's very thorough, it's very objective, and it points the ways forward, which I think is something very important. So just briefly, my view on what has been happening in terms of seabed mining in Portugal. So of course, Portugal has a huge EEZ, which it's trying to extend. One of the possibilities for the intention to extend is precisely to ascertain sovereignty over possible mineral deposits. This has been something that's been going on for a long time. I think the project of the extension of the platform of the continental shelf, has been there for at least 20 years, possibly more. So there is some mapping of the possible resources in the Portuguese seabed or around it. Of course, there seem to be deposits worth exploring potentially, and this has launched some interest between some government actors, officials, politicians, but also some possible companies, especially international companies. And there has been interest shown on doing pilot mining, especially in the areas of the Azores. Again, you can find this very well detailed in the report, in CZ At Risk's report. I have to say, for a long time, this was an issue that was not really publicly discussed. Although clearly also in the research realm, there was a lot of interest, a lot of things happening. Of course, Portugal has this huge, I would call it luxury, of having a huge area of deep sea under its sovereignty, which I think really comes with responsibility. But of course, Portugal has been in the map on this for a long time for those objective reasons. On research, Portugal is also on the front line. You can see also more about this in the report, where Portugal has been engaged in research projects that might lead to mining. But it was very much under the rug, behind the curtain, let's say it like that. It was only, I think, in the 2010s, I would say, also connected in some way to the fight against the start of oil and gas exploration in the Portuguese waters, that this issue really came to surface, also for different reasons, namely related to the protection of deep sea environments from fisheries and other threats. And from then on, I think also from some public pressure and some scrutiny from different authorities, I would say that the interest, at least the public interest to start mining tomorrow, has cooled off a bit. That's at least my view. But you can see these are images from the mission structure to extend the Portuguese continental shelf. You can see there's some knowledge and there's some interest in minerals. Nowadays, what I would say, I think Portugal has a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde stance on seabed mining in terms of public official position. We have, on the one hand, strategic documents, for example, the recovery plan after COVID, the strategy for the sea for the next 10 years. They clearly mention seabed mining as something that should be done. More than that, even giving it a lot of relevance. But on the other hand, you have Portugal really trying to fulfill this guardian of the ocean role internationally. And then you have different documents and instances where these two versions of what Portugal wants colliding. And so for us, from the NGO community, it's really clear for Portugal to get its story straight on seabed mining. I think a recent interesting development was the entire removal of the section on seabed mining from the mining law. It was there on the draft version. There was a lot of responses to the public consultation, and the result of it was that it was completely removed. And we think this is a good sign, and definitely we think this could be a good sign for Portugal to become a leader in supporting a moratorium, a ban, what have you, on seabed mining for as long as it makes sense, which we hope it's forever. And definitely I think there's also a very important role that Portugal can have on developing the alternatives to mining, whether on sea or on land, just in terms of reducing the need for minerals to be taken from the environment. And I would leave it at that and leave some more time for questions and answers. And thank you again very much for all those who are here today.
Thank you. So we should start with the session with the Q&As. Once again, we encourage everyone that's attending to drop their questions, and I think that it's more useful if we make this moment like a conversation. So I think that of course we have a few questions, but if you think that you want to add anything, I think for the sake of the webinar, you should, and you could interrupt us and let us know what you think. And for the participants, if they want to be identified, please just let us know who you are and which institution you are representing. Me and Monica are going to facilitate this part, and I think I can start with the first question. And the first question, it's not targeting anyone. I think that have anyone that wants to pick it up can do it. And the question is, considering that a lack of understanding of deep sea ecosystems is currently a reason not to mine, is there a risk that redirecting mining research funding to basic research funding could be used to eventually enable mining in the future when the ecosystem is better understood? Does any of you want to? I can pick someone if you want me to.
Well, I can give it a first shot, and then I'm pretty sure others will want to add into. There is a big lack of understanding of deep sea ecosystems. Right now, researchers are completely dependent on basically deep sea mining enterprises to go down in the deep and to get data, because it's a very expensive research, and it's simply currently only private enterprises that have enough money to help researchers do that research, and they are interested in that research simply because they need to have their environmental impact assessment in order to get the license to go drilling or collecting minerals. I think it would be very helpful if those two things were separated, because right now you're not sure if you are talking about independent research, and every time deep sea researchers come up from the deep sea, there's new species discovered, new knowledge there, and if those data are being in the possession of a private company rather than public, that hampers progression in research. I do not think that it might be a risk that if we know more about the deep, then eventually, and we understand the ecosystem system better, that eventually we think we will be ready to go mining. I think on the contrary, because so far, every time new data come up, it's getting more and more clear how special, how incredibly different the deep sea is, how species have incredible ways to adapt to all the extreme circumstances there, what the role is exactly of this deep sea in the carbon cycle, how important, how many more species there are than we currently ever thought there would be. Every time research data come back up from the deep, it shows that it's even more special than we thought it was. So I can only think that more knowledge about the deep sea will actually contribute to an understanding of the urgent need to protect this environment.
Yeah, sure, Marie-Luise.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, because of course that's the $1 million question. If either strategy will work to stop deep sea mining for good. I think one of the problems we have to address now is that maritime research is so expensive that it's often linked to private money. That's what Monica had said. And so the argument would always be that we need to know more about the deep sea, of course, but the objective cannot be mining. And so far there is way too little funding to do this properly. The second narrative is that we need less mining overall, because of course land-based mining is terrible for human rights and the environment as well. And there's always the answer for deep sea mining companies that they're saying we're replacing land-based mining, which is probably, and well, most likely not true, because it's the same companies that now invest in deep sea mining. If you look at Glencore, who's an investor in Deep Green, or whatever they will be called or are called now. So the overall narrative is always we need less mining. And additionally to that, I think a moratorium or a ban or any way to stop deep sea mining would help us to understand these alternative technologies. You might have seen it last week was a big press release on the protein battery, which will not use any minerals at all. And of course, all this is still in baby steps, shoes, or whatever the English proverb might be. But I think this is quite an exciting way to see at what kind of technological advantages we can have as modern society without mining, and that's actually the point. And I think the third reason why we can't allow deep sea mining even in the future is that it would probably not be us, or maybe Norway or Portugal, but most likely deep sea mining will start in the Pacific, where the human rights abuses will be really strong, because it's probably a couple of kilometers only in front of the beaches, and other sectors of economic activity, and the livelihood of people will be devastated. So even if deep sea mining in some ways will happen more environmentally friendly as it is now, it's probably going to impact the lives of people very much without the democratic agreement to it. So I think the objective is, in conclusion, to fund research that's not economically driven, to understand the deep sea, and I think this will logically then lead to us saying, no, let's keep our hands off the oceans.
Thank you very much. Monica, do you want to pick up the next question?
Yeah, next question is by Janos Schwei. Which countries do you think are most likely to unilaterally grant exploration or extraction licenses inside or outside Europe? Joám, you want to have a go at that?
Sure. Well, I think actually this has already happened. I mean, if you look at the Solwara project in Papua New Guinea, it ended up being a fiasco, but the licenses were there, and it was Nautilus Minerals, the company now defunct. And it was actually the same country that then also was trying to pursue some exploration contracts in the Portuguese waters. So, the attempts have already been there. Outside Europe, there's a number of states in the Pacific where there's some possibility of licenses moving in. Japan actually conducted its first excavation trials within its own continental shelf a few years ago in 2017. And within Europe, I guess Norway is, as you have heard, the country which is kind of moving a bit faster. Portugal had started with some of these licensing contracts a few years ago. It got stalled at the same time as things did not work well in the Pacific for the same company. But I guess we're looking at Norway mostly at this point.
Very straightforward answer. Next, we have a question to Gonçalo, and the question is, what are the alternatives to mining that the Portuguese government is doing? Is the green mining event on June? I think this is the last event that Tiago is mentioning, not June, but May, I think. because he's saying June, but I think it's May. Is the green mining event on May? It was a concern, to say the least.
Yeah. No, thank you for the question. Indeed, it was very concerning, and we at Sciaena definitely, and I think the NGO community in general was quite concerned about this event. It was a lot of greenwashing, if I can say that, and I think I can, because yeah, indeed, we all know what's happening, and we all know that these links and these claims that mining can be done without environmental impact are very shaky, to say the least. And let me clarify, and thank you for your question, because maybe I wasn't clear. Portugal, to our knowledge, isn't pushing alternatives. We want to convince our decision makers to go in that direction. But it's a dialogue that we hope that can take root in the next couple of years, because we've put it on our recommendations often. Portugal, in a scenario of exploration, Portugal would not really be developing the technologies. We would most likely take the worst cut of this deal, let's say it like that. Not that is my biggest concern, but I think that would clearly be the case. It would have been the case with oil and gas. So definitely we think, even from an economical point of view, Portugal would rather focus itself on the next phase, on developing the technologies that aren't there, on redesigning products so that the need for minerals is lower from the get-go, on the recycling of electronic waste, which just piles up in Europe's landfills and beyond. So this is the kind of thing that we would like Portugal to look as an alternative, an economical also alternative to seabed mining. But unfortunately, we really haven't seen that so far. We've seen just this repetition of an extractivism logic, which we think is completely unfit for purpose. As Marie-Luise mentioned, we don't want to replace a mining crisis with a climate crisis or a biodiversity crisis. And so that's basically the idea how we would like Portugal to go, an idea of the angle of the direction we would like Portugal to go, but we still have to convince our decision makers to go in that direction.
Yes, and that will probably not only be limited to Portugal. Marie-Luise, there's a question to you from Torius Klein van Kandel. BMW Group, among other global companies, has called for a moratorium on deep sea mining. How has the German government reacted to this business statement? Looking at the need for deep sea mining minerals to German industries.
Yeah, that's actually quite a big win for all the colleagues who were involved in that. So congrats to everybody out there who was talking to different kind of industry actors, and among them is BMW, big German car company you might know, but also Samsung and Google. So I haven't really seen any responses by the government, which is not surprising, because I think so far the car companies are not really the industry that they are envisioning for deep sea mining so far, but more shipping industry and shipping equipment. But of course, the resources coming out of it will most likely want to be used in German high industry or high tech industry. But yeah, I haven't seen any response, but I would be quite curious to ask them actually, because we have seen this argument always, we need this for the industry if we don't have resource security, which is the key word that we always hear, because whoever actors out there are threatening Europeans' resource security, you've probably heard that from your governments as well. So that's quite an interesting question to ask them. But maybe leading to our colleague from Norway, I would have a question on that, because the industry itself that's most evolved around deep sea mining lobbying is a bit of an obscure group of people who have been involved in deep sea mining for decades too, and kind of wanted seen in their lifetime. And they are now looking at Norway and have, it's called the Deep Sea Mining Alliance, and have signed an agreement with Norwegian industry to look at the Norwegian side. So maybe while we're speaking on industry, you would like to share a light on that, because I'm quite curious if anything has come out of this German-Norwegian industry cooperation. If you don't mind me ask the question as a panelist myself.
What I thought was very interesting about this new report from Seas at Risk is to get the international and global picture, because my work with deep-seated mining has currently been focused on Norway. So I'm very interested in looking forward to look at these agendas between countries, because of course in Norway we see that the lobby organizations that have been heavily focused on the oil industry, they can of course be used for this purpose as well. So I think we will see a really heavy lobby approach from them. And unfortunately, as I said, the picture in Norway, in the media, for example, is very heavily focused on how much money we can make from this, and that this is Norway's new oil adventure. And in that picture is very little focus on the environment and on nature, unfortunately.
Can I make? I mean, I should not make this question, but because I'm not attending. But I just have a quick question regarding that, because I was curious before. How is the public reacting to that in Norway? Do you have any insight on that? The civil society organizations, but also people that are not in civil society organizations.
In Norway, it's so many other debates currently. We have had a big, messy debate about the windmills in nature, and we have also received the latest report from the EIA telling that Norway should not initiate any new oil projects. And I think it's hard enough to get people to wrap their heads around this. So I think deep-seabed mining is something that we have to work to get in the public eye. But luckily, we have seen some interest from journalists to make really interesting cases, such as the video I showed you that was from a newspaper article today.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have here is from Bjorn Stockhausen, and he's asking, have you experienced whether there exists already or there might be increasing resistance against deep sea mining by actors from the pharmaceutical medicine sector for reasons of business competition? And then he adds, in the sense that deep sea mining sector is destroying potentially undiscovered marine genetic resources. Joám, I know you have something to say.
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of what has happened over the past year and a half with COVID kind of should be a sign, kind of a warning sign for this. And most people are unaware that the COVID PCR tests have been actually developed from an enzyme which is found in microbe, which is only exists in these hydrothermal vent systems, which are being targeted by deep sea mining, particularly for sulfate deposits. So, for example, these deposits in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and around Norway, also in the Azores, are precisely the places where, the only places in the world where this kind of microbial life and enzymes can be found. So, I think, among other things, that COVID kind of should be a wake-up call on, the risks of destroying these habitats, which are unique, before we even understand them properly, and we know how. I mean, I wouldn't frame it as a kind of a competition between the pharmaceutical or lobby and the deep sea lobby, but in terms of real benefit to humanity. And of course, if we look at this mandate of the common heritage of humankind, it's not only about the minerals, and we have to understand the big picture. And I think a lot of the research which is happening over the past decade kind of is helping us to see that big picture, and we should move away from this reductionist approach to the deep sea as a place we could just go and grab, and rather we have to look at what it has to offer, not only for medical research but also in terms of our climate and what it offers for sustaining for life support systems in the planet as a whole.
Thank you.
Yes, there's still many questions. As those things go, there's always more questions than time to answer, but we really are getting to a close of this. I just want to, there's two comments that I would just want to highlight quickly because nobody has to answer it, so we still have the 3 minutes to highlight it. And that is about the deep sea research and the fact that if you gather data for environmental driven deep sea research, not deep sea research for mining, you are still collecting data that are like gold for the mining industry, because it will make their mining operations so much cheaper if that data are already gathered. So that is a point to note. And another point is made by Jessica Ng. She's a scientist working with indigenous communities in the Andes who are resisting lithium mining. And there they have seen how science can be used in various ways by the mining companies against the communities. So it's also very important to realize how deep sea research can help or help destroy the deep sea environment. That all said, I think we will try to we will wrap this up. We have the recording and we will get back to you with a link to the recording so you can all look it back up. In the chat was, and perhaps Anna can still for one more time put there, the link to the Seas at Risk report, where you find some answers on what's at stake in Europe on deep sea mining and where the different countries are. We've heard several things from the panelists. The one thing that really stuck to me is that Norway sees deep sea mining as the new oil adventure. I think that says it all. It also explains that at least in Norway, they used to be quite upfront. Now they are walking really behind if they are prepared to make the same mistakes as we did in the last decade. And where we know oil has caused a planetary crisis, why would we go for another oil adventure? Not quite clear about that. I do hope it is very clear from our discussions and report here is that we really need to transition to a different economy where we do not need that much resources, because we simply are at the limits, at the boundaries of our planet. We cannot go for more. There is no more. We better try to refocus and readjust now that we still have time for it. So we need binding EU and national material footprint reductions, because we need to protect the deep sea, where life on all life on Earth started. We are going for a prohibition of deep sea mining on continental shelves in European waters. We really want Europe and the member states to advocate for at the ISA for a moratorium or a conditional prohibition in international waters on deep sea mining. And we heard about Germany, that now the Industry of Environment is also gotten into the negotiations, and with it there is a growing concern now in Germany on deep sea mining, which leads directly to one of our recommendations, is to involve environmental ministries, scientific bodies and stakeholders in the adoption of the relevant decisions on deep sea mining in national and international waters. There was another thing I wanted to say, but I've forgotten now. Something I picked up on the Portuguese intervention, obviously, because I had not mentioned that yet. And I linked it to one of our recommendations, but sure, I don't know which one it was now anyway. Sorry. I do know.
About alternatives, Monica?
Sorry?
Was it about alternatives?
It was about alternatives. Thank you very much. And we meanwhile highlighted, Marie-Luise highlighted again that right now there are already the possibilities to have batteries without metals. I mean, why on earth would you invest many, many millions to destroy the environment if it's not even needed by the time you get the metals? Additionally, I also wanted to highlight still that the funding for research in deep sea mining, even though I highlighted these two comments on the pros and cons to that, We really think that those fundings, public funding, should not go into deep sea mining technology, but in fundamental research and in pathways to reduce resource use, like, for example, supporting research on metal-free batteries. And indeed, the ISA urgently needs an institutional reform. We didn't go into the specifics of that. Marie-Luise touched on it. In the report, you'll find more about it, because it's set up in a way that it can only agree to get licenses and exploit the deep sea. And they're totally forgetting about the other part of the mandate, which is to protect the seabed. I think I will leave it at this. It's always very satisfactory to be able to have the last word, but you all need to go to the next part of your life. So I'll leave it at that. We'll be back to you with an email to give you a link to listen to this all back. And thank you all for joining. Bye.